Okay, y'all, we'll go ahead and get started tonight. There again, another chapter. Chapter 4 wasn't on our sheet tonight. However, it is an important chapter, and it is a kind of lengthy one. However, what I went through, because it is kind of redundant, and we're just going to hit on a lot of the high points because of the communications documentation. Most of you that are advanced EMTs have been around the system for a while and kind of understand the basic communication and stuff and how that works out for us. But so in the sake of time for tonight, I'm going to skip through some of these pretty quick just so we can hit on the high points. But communications is what I hear a lot of people complain about, that it seems like it's always trying to improve, and we're never really satisfied with it. And communication goes from anything as being able to know when the call comes, when you call it in, or someone notifies the person who may be calling of what's going on. The way they interact with the call taker interacts with the dispatcher, and of course they get the information out to the crews and the responding units to the scene. So, and I know we get all frustrated. I know, especially I do myself sometimes, when we don't get enough information, and it leads us up to a lot of questions before we get there. But of course, dispatch and the communication systems can only relay that information that they have, and we've got there before, get a call for someone that may have fallen, and when we get there, they've actually, the reason they failed, maybe their heart stopped, or addresses and finding the cause. A lot of times that is getting to prove more and more difficult as people move out into not only rural areas, but some urban areas. When before, with just the enhanced 911 that used landlines, these calls would go through a main control center that would show up where the address is, who the caller is. But with cell phones, they will hit a tower and not always reflect the exact location, and questions have to be asked about it. Documentation. We've all heard that if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen, and that is a stalemate with the EMS, because these are, when you this becomes legal documents, can be brought back years later, which I've experienced before. Depositions had to be given sometimes 5 to 6 years later, and if they can really tear someone up on the witness stand, because for example, they had some, and as I'll relay a little bit more about this case study in just a minute, they would pull stuff from the report, ask me questions about it, and if I deviated any at all from the report, what was written down, then they started trying to throw curveballs at me to question some irregularities, and a lot of times they try to prove incompetence just by reading from your report. So documentation can be, it's a record, what we find, what we did, the outcome. We're going to talk about some of the ways that y'all may write reports in your areas that you work with. Some places have their own policy variations of what they're supposed to be working with, and you have to adjust pretty much the same information to your local areas. Verbal communication, you do that every day, whether you realize it or not. Sometimes if you're going to have to excuse me for a minute, I've got somebody that's outside my house. I'm not sure what they're doing out there. Verbal communication skills that's skills you should learn when you're a child. When you're growing up, you mature them, you develop them as you get older. It helps you to relate with bystanders, talk with family members, police officers, other first responders that may have gotten there first, and of course when you transfer patient care. It's I used to like to get nurses or somebody from the hospital side to talk about a way a report was relayed, because since that is a definitive care, they try to get the most information they can from the scene, and then of course apply it to the treatment needed. Now, of course, it seems like when a patient or a family member tells you something on the scene, it always seems to change when you do get to the hospital. That's where your written documentation would come in. It's like, well, here's what they told me, here's what I wrote down. So if that ever comes back, you'll have something to rely on. Most places in the transport industry of EMS has gone to the electronic records, whether they use the tough books, other types of devices, because it's easily recorded, submitted, and becomes part of a permanent record just at your fingertips. When before the written ones had to be stored somewhere, you'd have to find storage places, and if you ever had to pull those records, it was pretty much difficult. It really made it difficult to have to find them, especially if it was years old and buried inside of a warehouse and things like that. When you do a report, and I've seen people start working on a report while in the back of the ambulance with the patient on board, care still being administered, that the patient doesn't get they get the idea that, hey, you might not be paying the best attention to them. And of course, if you're focused on writing a report, you may miss cues in the actual patient care. I've seen people come in with a report that was pretty much written, but yet they had a call where they was saying they had a STEMI, the patient had an active heart attack going on. So documentation is very important, but it has its place. It should really occur only after any type of patient care. And this provides a chain of custody as far as the transfer of responsibility. For example, first responders don't always, the people that get there first before you with fire departments, they may not have a written report or anything that they can actually turn over to you. Whereas in a lot of places, it's required by law that a written report or patient medical record be left with the facility. And if it's electronic ones, they should be made available to the receiving facility within 24 hours. And a lot of these are dictated CMS or like specific trauma regions that they require that those documents be submitted to the patient's actual record at the hospital within a 24-hour period. So, and they also go back to where we talked about last week as far as pulling records and statistics, information from your charts to perform some important data to do research and stuff with. Now, radio and telephone communications, different areas use different methods. In a lot of places in South Mississippi, Central Mississippi, I've heard some places in Louisiana as well as Mobile and Alabama area as well, but they still use the StateNet hospital radio to give patient reports. A lot of areas they go straight by cell phones. Perhaps maybe they have one number that they will call in to give a medical report, and it goes into a recording type computer, and then they can hit the selection of the extension of the hospital or facility they actually want to call, but it's recorded by cell phone. These reports given by radio should always be recorded. For example, if you receive orders or instructions given by a physician for a patient, it should be recorded because you don't want somebody to come back later and dispute that. Then you won't have anything to stand on. So it's always a good idea to have a dedicated recorded line if you call in with the telephone to give those reports. It's important to know how to use these systems as well. Don't if systems are updated, of course, they should have in-services and things like that to teach you from, but understand that the way that these systems work, it does make it difficult. I know in some areas to where they have more than one hospital. Some areas may use a StateNet system, whereas others want you to call by phone. And they try to get you to bend your ways of doing things to accommodate the way that they do it. The therapeutic communication it's the art and skill of communicating with people on what may be done on the worst days of their life. You may be tired, overworked, an emotional state yourself, but when people call you out there, a lot of times you are their answer prayer. They're expecting you to help make a difference and not be torn apart or thrown off by the activities. So learning how to communicate with a patient is pretty much, it is paramount. Now, not to down or go say anything against anybody in the younger generation, or however, but when I've hired people before, paramedics and EMTs, especially sometimes younger people, they do a lot of communication now by phone, whether it be text, email, Snapchats, video calls, and that works great among people their own age or close to their ages. However, a lot of our clientele, our patients, are elderly, don't really have anything to do with electronic communications, really not familiar with it at all. So given that, it verbal skills are something that a lot of people need to practice on and need to work with about it. I've seen excellent EMTs and paramedics, but they would have difficulty communicating with someone that was 80 or 90 years old. Just weren't real good with one-on-one communication. But when you techniques and strategies that we need to work on is be encouraging when these patients are feeling down, hurt, or toward their family. Try to have a positive relationship with them. If you go in with an attitude or negative feeling or some anxiety, they're going to detect that right away. The way you look at somebody, eye contact, facial expressions. I had somebody yell at me just a couple nights ago, and it's simply because I couldn't hear what they were saying because of the yelling. But all I did was kind of look up, and then the family started on me. You know, sir, I ain't got time for your attitude. And I mean, all I did was look up, and I guess it showed. So body positioning, talking to someone with your arms open or crossed, that sends a message to somebody. Well, if you got your arms crossed and you're sitting there, it's kind of like you appear to be not interested. Whether you realize it or not, facial expressions, we all have seen that eye roll between each other. So certain types of cultures, people that may have hearing problems or understanding speech, some people might have a hearing issue where they can actually hear, but they're not unable to comprehend or put words into a communicating means where they understand it. So just be aware of these changes in somebody. This is a communication model that when you develop an idea in your head, you get it out, you send it out to the person you're trying to communicate to transmit ideas for that they can understand or get it across to them. It has to work both ways. You got to send it, they got to be able to receive it and understand it. So you might have to change, like you've got medical knowledge or becoming advanced providers now, and you sometimes it's hard to, I don't want to say dumb it down, but sometimes you got to find a way to kind of take the medical aspect out of it and put it into layman's terms for certain people. Culture, we're starting to see a more diverse population. Different cultures are going to bring different ways of understanding, different ways that allow you treatment, and this is pretty much what this person has known for all their life. So if there's a conflict of the way you understand things, the way the person does, then the things you mean that it's easy for some people to take offense with when you ask a question that you would normally ask anybody else. But if they're very ethnocentric or egocentric to their group, that can be taken wrong, and the call can go downhill from there. So in some places, direct eye contact is to me, it's important when I communicate with somebody or they talk back to me. To me, it is, I like to have direct eye contact to notice one's paying attention to me. However, in some cultures, direct eye contact can be impolite, or some people can look away. If they look away while they're speaking or look at their phone or check a message, a lot of times they'll turn you out from that. Now, we talked about, you heard me say a term earlier that called ethnocentrism. And simply what this is some people think that their culture, their way of doing things is really the only one that matters. You see that a lot with like certain religious groups, their opinion or the way they've always been raised up is the only way that they look at this, that look at certain situations. They may not want a person of the opposite sex to listen to their chest or to perform an examination. So, and then cultural imposition is another one, actually forcing your values on someone else. You got to be aware of that, and it's most of the time that happens, it's done because people really don't understand that they've done it. You may go to a call to where someone has died or have been pronounced dead, and from your religious views, you may want to say, well, they're in a place better off right now. They may not have the same religious beliefs that you do. In fact, they may be very mad at a deity or God, and get mad and upset with you. And it's not because you meant to do it, but you just got to be aware that everybody doesn't agree the same way that you do. You've got certain ways of looking at things. It's because your background, where you've been brought up, and it carries over with other people as well. So a lot of times you don't even have to say something to somebody for them to get the idea. Of course, the guy on top, he looks like he's very approachable. Good conversation taking place. The guy on the bottom, I mean, you can tell just by looking at him. Neither one of them has to say anything. You can pretty much tell what kind of interaction you're going to have with them. Noise. That's anything that causes you not to be able to hear, whether it's hum of the engine, people talking, background distractions, and loud car engines. There's actually a study that they've done on this, and the study of this is called proxemics, and it's goes into speech audiology, things like that, above what we're going to do or outside of what we're going to do, but didn't realize that there was a story behind it. So asking questions, you got to be able to ask questions. Don't lead them. You don't want to say something like, hey, does your teeth itch, or does it feel like your hair's on fire? Hey, get these people to describe things to you. It's hard to communicate with some patients if there's a lot of people around in a room. Sometimes you need to privatize that, get them out somewhere. So whenever possible, you need to use as much communication with you and the patient. Closed-ended questions, sometimes I do get to that point. It's when you got something going on that's bad or it's urgent, you may start asking questions, and as soon as you get the answer to that question, you move to the next one. Now, someone outside of what your perspective is simply, they may think, well, he's rude, he kept cutting me off, or she kept cutting me off, when that is simply means, and I'll tell them a lot of times, hey, when I get the answer that I need, I got a little time to get a lot of information, so when I get my answer, I'm moving on to the next question. What we just talked about. Some of the tools we need to use that we learn with an experience, or perhaps that you've taken classes before, or some people are just naturally better listeners than other people. To facilitation, encourage people to talk more and provide the information. You want to encourage this. Allow the patient to speak to you. Sometimes you might need to hold your tongue a little bit, or get somebody else to hold their tongue. It's very frustrating to me when I ask a question and somebody just kind of won't shut up long enough for me to give them an answer. Be sensitive to what they feel, what their thoughts are. Confrontational. It's very easily to get confrontational sometimes when someone seems to be attacking you. It seems like everybody knows how to do the job of an EMT or paramedic. When you get on scene, everybody's always got advice for you. And in some areas, it's just not good to be confrontational. If you're in an area where it's a high crime rate, or if there's a lot of cultural diversity between the two of you, then it may not be a good idea at all to try to get conversational. It's just kind of get the patient, get out, and then go on. Some people like us, I know, and you got to do this with, of course, due regard, of course, but touching a patient or comforting, touching a hand on their shoulder, tap their hand. Some people relate to that. It kind of shows some empathetic feelings, and that the patient does feel important that you're communicating with directly to it. Of course, you don't want to do it all the time or touch some people that might be inappropriate. We've all seen on the news lately some medics and things like that in local areas that have gotten in trouble for that. that brings up a new topic as far as having cameras in the back of the ambulance before. I mean, nowadays, at one point, I was not real sure about that. However, I've seen colleagues that have been accused of things, or violent patients end up attacking medics, and for so long it's been our word against theirs. But I don't think that it's a bad idea. They talk about, well, the HIPAA thing or the Privacy Act. Things may need to change in order to protect people. So when interviewing questions, there's some things you just kind of don't need to encourage or get into. If someone is bad, they're sick, you know they're probably going to die, or they're hurt real bad, you don't want to say something like, "Oh, they're going to be okay. He's going to be fine. We'll get it taken care of." Don't provide, do not provide false assurance or reassurance. It's okay to be encouraging. However, do not provide false information or give them kind of false hope. Sometimes advice can get you in trouble. If it wasn't, you might want to. Some people have seen want to show off how smart they are, or something that may have worked for them in the past. And what they'll say just about every time is like, "Well, that paramedic or that EMT told me to do this." And you being in a professional mode, you can get in trouble. Telling people, "Well, I think you need to take this, or I need you to take that." That can be seen as a form of prescribing. Talked about don't interrupt the patient. Sometimes you may have to step in and say something, or they might be chasing a tangent. Or how many times you've been to a house, when you get there, the phone rings and they start talking to everybody but you. That to interrupt a patient in that case might be getting back to the means at hand and get everybody focused. Using why sometimes can be, it might sound offensive. Like if somebody might say, "Well, I might be having a heart attack," or "I think I'm having a stroke," or "I hadn't been to the hospital. This has been hurting a week and I haven't been." If you start saying, "Well, why did you wait so long?" and things like that, it can get offensive on part of the patient side. And there again, professional jargon. People are not going to probably, a lot of people aren't going to know what a myocardial infarction is or subarachnoid hemorrhage. You got to use layman's terms with a lot of these patients that are not medical. And occasionally you will run across that person that just knows everything, and sometimes they might make you go look up stuff. So family and friends, sometimes it can be valuable for the patient. It can be encouraging for them. It can give them a source of comfort, but a lot of times it can be interference. So if possible, maybe your partner or another crew member that might be there, if they can talk to the patient separately from the family if they have to get that information done, so it allows one of you to get a focused interview, then you may have to do it like that. So sometimes family members that are standing by with they can make things worse. Well, they'll start telling stories. "Hey, I had an uncle that did this. I think you need to go, and I think you need to go." So a lot of times I like to get these interviews by myself if at all possible. Eye contact, unless it's some type of cultural thing that we learned earlier, but eye contact is very important. Now, if you have trouble looking at somebody directly in the eye, some people do that. I mean, just look at their forehead or look at their mouth. And sometimes if they're close enough, they can't really tell if you're looking at that or not. But looking at someone's forehead, something just that simple might help you out a little bit. You want to be aware of your reaction. Eye rolling, things like that. Crossing your hands when you shouldn't be to. And for example, like when you're establishing the rapport with these patients, like their pain levels, how many times you've seen somebody say, "Well, I'm hurting on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm hurting as a 10, but they don't show it in their face." There are other pain scales and stuff that we can use, but playing it down in front of them can cause a negative reaction with y'all. Just think about some times when you might have been in pain, like with kidney stone or things like that, and you didn't feel like you were getting treated quick enough. Now, there are those habitual offenders out there, and that's aside from this argument. The staying calm is when you control the scene, the highest level trained person that's going to be there, everybody's going to look at you for guidance. You got to try to, keep it together, be confident. You don't have to be cocky, but be confident and realize that everybody's relying on you and following your lead. If you start losing it, then more than likely the scene's going to turn bad. Uh, you do show some sense of urgency. I've had calls before where they would say, "Hey, this paramedic, he was working on my mama and he didn't act like it bothered him." So I ain't saying you got to freak out, throw your hands up and everything. However, just be aware they're picking up on that's the type of communication that they get, and they take it wrong sometimes. A lot of time, if you'll be respectful toward the patient, show them respect, then a lot of these things will fall into place. It's usually nice people. You may have heard this saying that nice people will get you in trouble, and what that means is like you could do the best care or some of the highest tech treatment in the world, but if you're rude and crude about it, then they're going to remember that. But if you're nice, all they're going to remember is how nice you were to them or how nice you were to their mama. So that's why I say nice people get you in trouble, because people are like, well, they just injected about 50 cc's of air into your vein. Yeah, but they were so nice when they did it. I mean, it does play a big role in it. Being nice simply involves if they need to get some stuff together, pack a small bag or things like that. Call a neighbor, lock their doors for them. Just simply being nice sometimes goes a long way without you having to be over emotionally involved with it. Children, when you're dealing with children, first off, they're going to be scared to death because if something happened, mom and dad's probably already upset, and you're going to they're going to have a lot of people with uniforms and equipment come into their house. It's already going to start freaking them out with that. Kids, before I even get to a kid, if it's possible, find out their name. When you call their name, it sets them at ease. Kind of get down to their level. Don't stand over them. That a lot of time assures confidence with that. I've had to put oxygen masks or act like I was taping an IV to a doll or a teddy bear, things like that, to kind of get them to not be afraid and to realize that, hey, maybe they're not the only one in the situation. It kind of makes things easier on them. It's like, well, they're a little stuffed animal. Hey, he's sick too. Let's take him with us and treat him as well. If any of you have children, you're going to be, it's the highest guard level you can have is when you're watching someone else take care of your kid. So just bear in mind, like the way you watch a caretaker, somebody that's taking care of your kid or in charge of their care, just at that time, you're going to be what everybody's watching. So expect some critique. Expect people to maybe question, hey, what is that you're doing? That's just natural. That's natural as far as a parent taking care of a child. So just mind that when you interact back with them. I know if I had somebody that was mean and crude and scared my child, I'd be very, very unlikely to let them take charge of it. So that's, of course, you can allow more interaction of the parent if the child is not critical, and if they are critical, life threatening, then they just may have to get over the emotional issue later, but you got to do what you got to do. But it still helps to be respectful, be honest to them, and please let them know that you got the child's best interest at heart about it. So don't lie to a kid. Hey, if it's going to hurt, tell them, hey, this is probably going to hurt a little bit. It's going to feel like a pinch, or I'm fixing to have to give you a shot. Because if you tell them it don't hurt and it does, and you've lost rapport with that child. Children are very easily to lose trust with an adult, especially one if they're in a bad situation like that. I'm going to back up to move over here. Hearing impaired people. Now, I know my father-in-law my father deals with this right now. He normally intelligent. They know what they want to get out a lot of times, or some people not only can't, it's not that they can't hear the word, that they really can't understand it or decipher out what's being said or comprehend what's being said. So they become lip readers, or sometimes you can look at somebody and kind of tell what their lips said, or maybe do a little mouth reading yourself. It's a lot of times they're embarrassed by it. They get frustrated with it. A lot of times they just will not say anything or ask questions that are important because they don't want to deal with the other person getting irritated with their hearing loss. They may have old hearing aids that don't work anymore. They may have lost some. Their batteries may be dead, and sometimes they just misplace them and forget where they are, or they and sometimes they're very profoundly deaf or hearing impaired. So you may want to write and communicate with them if you need to, but just bear in mind that that can happen to anybody, and it's just as frustrating for them as it is you. So you may want to have something. I carry a little notepad in my pocket if I need to write stuff down, if they're able to write or anything back like that. But that can be a tool of the trade that you need to keep close by. It not only helps you to communicate with them, but you can still have write down important patient information and stuff to it. Speaking sign language, I never learned how to sign. I know a lot of people has, and it is a great skill to learn. So if you're able to do that, then great. I don't know a lot about sign language. I think that there's different dialects, even with that as there is with verbal communication, and there are some different meanings. Same gestures may have different meanings across different areas. So that's something I'm not really aware of, but just realize that it can happen if you do know something like that. So visually impaired. You need to find out first off if the vision impairment is new or chronic. They not always completely blind. Sometimes they can actually see some things, or shadows, or dementia is not the correct word that I want to use, but different areas of reflection that they can see from. If they've been that way for a long time, if someone's had a hearing impairment for a long time, then they may have a way of communicating or adjustment to it. And some of them, they do get around pretty okay, and they've adapted pretty good to their way of living. So you want to be close by to where they are. Know that you're still there. You definitely don't want to let them, even though they may know their way around their room or house, get them outside or in the ambulance. You may want to put your hands on these people and guide them, but you definitely don't want them to fall down and get hurt. Explain to them what you're doing. Don't just grab an arm and start sticking them with a needle or that matter. Guide dogs. Most of them have they're supposed to have an identifiable harness that actually sets them apart as actually a true service dog. It's aggravating and frustrating now how a lot of people misuse this, and just they'll say, well, my pet is my service dog, or my pet is my support dog. They're not the same. Most guide dogs are very well disciplined and well behaved and trained. And there was just an article I saw a couple of days ago on one of the online news departments, and a kid was attacked at a restaurant. There were two supposedly service dogs, but they turned and attacked a kid. I've had people sit in restaurants down from it. Their dog was not a service dog. It actually would use the restroom on the table legs and things like that. And a lot of people just won't say nothing to them, afraid of offending them and getting them mad. So service dogs, true service dogs, are supposed to be kept with the patient as much as possible. Now, if there is a problem with patient care or interference and stuff like that in the back of the truck, that's something you might need to make other arrangements for. So most hospitals have a place to care for them, to store them at, most bigger hospitals anyway. And sometimes if the patient's conscious and able to talk to you and things like that, a lot of times they can give you information about the dog and instructions for what they care, or maybe they may have a number or something like that, or a support group for the guide dogs where people can come and get them if they need to. Non-English speaking patients, very, very.
Hey, Lynn.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I had a quick question on that.
Yeah.
With the guide dogs, so or the support dogs. So, we're trying to keep them with the patient
Hmm.
and everything. Is there how do you make that call? Are you just gonna wing it? Say, if they say it's a support dog because it's the patient, we're just gonna chance it and bring it on the ambulance. Is there some kind of mediation that we're allowed to have with that and say, we don't think the dog would be a good fit. It's freaking out in the back of the ambulance. It's going to interrupt our care.
Uh,
Is there a way to handle that specifically, like check for papers or anything? Or
well, they're supposed to have a certain type identifiable harness and things like that to it, but anybody can get one of those made now. Uh, so it will be hard to tell sometimes, hey, is this actual service dog or not? My thing is when I get in the back of the ambulance, whether it be dog, parent, or whatever, if it starts interfering with what needs to be done, then I start making that call right then. Look, your dog's not, it's interfering. A lot of times, true service dogs, I mean, I've seen them on airplanes and in public, and they they behave pretty well. And sometimes you'll see if a dog is not behaving well, that's interfering with what you need to do, then I would, at that point, I would try to find an alternate means of transportation for it. Now, I've never had, God, I have done this a long time. I've never had like a blind person with a service dog, but I have had people that said that they had an emotional support dog. And when I went to put my hands on the patient, the dog started interfering with what I needed to do. And the they were able to make a call and stuff. It worked out that time they were able to make a call. But I said, hey, the dog's not going to be able to go because it's interfering. And it already started to show some offensive behavior when I was assessing the dog's owner. I've been bit by dogs because I was trying to assess owners before. And that might be involving where my safety is interfered with, where I would say, no, I'm sorry, I can't let this happen. The dog is interfering.
right at that point, we just would have to call for law enforcement, and
I have to call for
hopefully
law
they have like
enforcement
a
to do something like that, or maybe a supervisor if they're able to take hold of it. Now, if it's a life-threatening situation, the patient's not going to have a big say so in it. However, what's going on with the dog? Is he going to, uh, the dog gets just as emotionally attached to the person as the person does the dog, and that might be something the dog just don't need to see. So, but
Mhm.
if you're in the back, you're doing CPR, or you got something going on majorly, then I would definitely have the dog removed from the scene or the source, and provide, if possible, try to get an alternate means of transportation. Now, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, uh, would you want to leave the dog out somewhere by itself? Well, you got to thinking, well, I've got a human life in danger here, and the dog that's really interfering with what I need to do. In that case, it's not like a temporary dump. I mean, a permanent dumping thing. I would probably say, hey, here's where we left it at. Try to get some police or somebody on the way. But this guy's having a STEMI, and his dog will not let me work with him. It's not an easy call. That would be the ones that would have. That would be one of the situations where I'd fall back on. Well, I was able to say why I did it. Just do what you're able to say why you did.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of brought up my mind. You were saying the other day, do it, do what you got to do, but have a reason why you did it. And I think that'd be a clear justification of, I had to dump this dog. I understand it seemed cruel, but it was, patient's life or my life, or have the dog in there. And at the end of the day, I chose what's best for the patient. So thank
The,
you, Lynn. I appreciate it.
the first class. I think I was talking about one of the things, the philosophies that I rely on right now is I'm able to say why I do what I do and what I didn't do. So, good question. And that's a situation, and that is a situation you're going to start seeing more of because people are, but look at what's on the news lately. A lot of airlines are starting to crack down. A lot of restaurants are starting to crack down on this because people are taking advantage of it so much. And a true service dog, they say, will really not cause any interference or should not uh, cause problems. One, it's a true service dog. So just bear that in mind. As a good question, and it don't come across. I hadn't come across it a whole lot, but there again, you start to see more and more. And my if the dog's not interfering with me, and it is there, if it hey, even if it is not a true service dog, if it's not interfering, but it's something that they need, then I probably wouldn't be objective, because you almost get into a level of political correctness sometimes when you get people, well, this is my emotional support dog, or I need this dog because of this. So just bear that in mind. But bottom line is, hey, it's interfering with me doing my job. That's when you've got to be the, make that definitive decision like that. So it's hard to non-English speaking patients. I kind of fought myself on not learning another language before in the past. I mean, the only Spanish I know is when I need to order like Taco Bell or something like that. But hopefully there's an interpreter around. And sometimes I can't differentiate. I usually can tell Spanish and I can tell French, but there are a lot of dialects within those languages that that we may or may not be aware of. When I worked out in West Texas in the oil fields out there as a safety medic, I would and I was there. It goes back to cultural ethnocentrism, and I would say, hey, do y'all speak Spanish at home or whatever like that? And they'll tell you real quick, I don't speak Spanish, I speak Mexican. I offended them without even realizing it. I just did not know. A lot of the Oriental or Asian dialects kind of cross over, and to me, I hope this won't sound bad, whatever, but a lot of times I can't tell if it's a Korean or Chinese or Japanese. I can't tell. I can usually pick up Vietnamese out of the rest of them. So sometimes you might not know which type of interpreter to ask for. So pointing to a part of the body that I could be able to pick up on something like that. A lot of people, what I have seen in my experience, so is like, even though they can't speak English, I kind of like, hey, I need to do this, or like to run an EKG, they would hold their chest, and I told them like, here's what I need to do, and hook it up. And I hadn't had a lot of resistance if I kind of acted like, hey, okay, I see what you got, I see what's going on, so let me try to put this on you. I hadn't really met a lot of resistance like that, but I have had some on drugs, alcohol, or violence or something was happening like that. And they were very, very difficult to deal with. But that might have been the case too, even if they did speak the language that I seen. There are a lot of apps and guides out there, perhaps. For example, pocket cards that I could show people in a different language, or apps. Fortunately, that is a good thing about modern technology, is you might be able to put in a word, find out what it means, and relay that way. So the touch, eye contact is pretty much a universal communication means. Family members, hopefully, a lot of times they don't interfere, but sometimes they can. But that might be your only chance of being able to communicate with somebody with special needs, or what they understand. It's like, hey, they need this toy. I transported a lady the other day. She's a special needs adult, and she was scared. We were taking her to a place. This was a pretty significant day in her life, leaving her surroundings, and they were taking her to a long-term care facility. And she had 3 or 4 stuffed animals. So, hey, we loaded them up. And then, the thing with the mask, she asked me, why you got a mask? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I got one for you too if you want to wear it. So I had one on her. Then I ended up putting one on every one of her stuffed animals. But hey, it worked. So, find ways to make it work, what they understand. That's what she understood. And I let her take as many of those stuffed animals as they had let her, because she was leaving a familiar facility or area, going to something that's unfamiliar. And that hopefully made it a little bit easier on her. So children with special needs, sometimes the parents are still figuring this out, but they are your best source of being able to communicate with these kids. And if at all possible, if there's no interference or signs of abuse or neglect, maybe it's a good idea to let the parents stay with them. So mutual respect goes a long way. Now, sometimes I still say, hey, EMS is kind of like the underclass of the medical area, because you do have a lot of good rapport with hospitals and things like that in some areas, but in some areas you kind of get treated bad. It's kind of like, well, you really don't matter. I was just the other day, I was fixing to transport a patient home, and they didn't think I needed to know any information. So I need to know, are they, what's their medical condition? Are they a full code or not? And I mean, if something happens, she said, why do you need that? I'm like, I couldn't believe her ignorance. But it's like, ma'am, if something happens, I need to know what I'm dealing with. And I said, no, turn it around. I said, not at the risk of being rude. I said, turn it around. And what if I just come brought a patient and threw it at your bed and left? You know, I said, think about it like that. So I was trying to give her, look, you have some mutual respect toward me, and I'll have some mutual respect toward you. Volunteer, first responders, hey, they may not have some of them may not have a lot of training or a lot of medical background, or may not have a lot of medical terminology, but it's important to get their information, show them respect as well, because they're going to be the ones at 2 a.m. that's out there doing that lift assist with you, hopefully. So when you get to the hospital, there again, you want to be able to relay, hey, here's what we found, here's what happened. When I give a report, I try to give a format pretty much the way my written report is. And I write the written reports in like an L chart method. And I'll actually say, hey, we were called out for this. Here's what they were complaining of. Here's what led up to it and what they done at home. Here's what I did. Here's what happened. And that's pretty much follows your, the L. It's like, hey, why was we called? The C, what are they complaining of? The H for HPI. Here's the events leading up to the event. Here's what they did. A is my assessment. Here's what I found. R is what I did for them, and T is what happened afterwards. I usually try to give my reports like that, even over the air and in person, because that way it kind of keeps me in line and not forget anything. So pretty much just what I just told you before I flipped over to this one. But what happened? Why were you there? Now, it is important to note, well, the patient was complaining of chest pain. All right, that is a symptom, but you got to look at the patient was complaining of chest pain. What I saw, however, they were all so breathing 33 times a minute. Now, they might not be complaining of that, but that's a sign that you see. So that's important. Complaining of chest pain, however, I observed they were very tachypnic. And, that's information that goes along in that first part. Important history, toenail removal 6 years ago, no. If they're having chest pain, it is important to know that they have maybe a history of a PE in the past, or hey, they've been having chest pain. They've been laying in bed for about a week and a half because they had a broke leg. I mean, how would that, lead them to think about maybe a possible PE versus a possible cardiac problem? So kind of paint the picture for them as to the way you found them, what was presented to you. And the pertinent findings of physical exams. Last night I worked in Hattiesburg, and I was showing my partner where we'd worked a car wreck once, and the lady was complaining of, she was sitting in the back seat, pretty significant impact, not a mark on her, and she complained of nothing. Ma'am, what's wrong? Nothing. I don't hurt nowhere. Ma'am, are you hurting anywhere at all? No. But and the reason I use the number 33 because it just stuck with me forever. She was breathing 33 times a minute. So that is a very pertinent finding in this physical exam. Hey, visually, this lady was atraumatic. However, she had a respiratory rate of 33. We get her to the hospital. She codes and dies because her aorta was torn. And she was compensating without realizing it. Blood pressure was compensating. Her pulse rate was a little tacky, but not enough to make me go, okay, that's crazy. But her respiratory rate, that's one of the first things that, hey, your body is losing this oxygen carrying capability, so they're making up with respirations. So that is a pertinent find. I said, Doc, the only thing I could find was she was breathing 33 times a minute. Vital signs, what you gave en route, hey, the pain was relieved. I gave 1 nitro, the pain was relieved, or I gave 1 nitro, the patient had a hypotensive episode after that, then I gave a fluid bolus. So you want to be able to say what you saw, what you did, and don't try to cover anything up. It's like, well, his blood pressure did drop down below 80 once, but it come back up, so I'm not going to say anything. That's all very, very important. Remember, would you want them to know about that about you or your family? I started this a long time ago. It's very basic radio systems. they worked off repeaters. If you get out of your truck, you'd flip your repeater switch on, and your signal would go from the truck back to the main base. And I tell you what, I think we did better with those simple systems than a lot of stuff we do now. These trunking systems, 800 systems, you do have a lot of dead areas, it seems like. And it seems like they all have to run through a computer or phone lines. And if those are down, that's an extra thing to it. That's just me kind of hanging on to the past a little bit. Some areas have very good systems. Navigators in the trucks, GPS systems. They sometimes taken a lot of thinking process out of it. So the radio systems for the most part are transmitters, receivers. I'm not real technological savvy when it comes to those things like that. I kind of wish I might have went that route years ago. But at one time when I first started, it seemed like every system in a 100-mile range was on the same frequency. And we could hear ambulances in New Orleans as well as I could be sitting in Hattiesburg dispatching, and I could hear ambulances in New Orleans as well as Bessemer in Alabama on the same frequency. And it was a nightmare. So nowadays they have more specific type frequencies or channels. When you key up on a frequency, now it may transmit it on a different one this time than it did the last time, and because they're constantly rotating, looking for open areas, and your radio learns to lock up with that. That's why they have like zones on some of these radio zones, areas, TAC, things like that. And there again, I understand the very basics about that, but I'd probably confuse you more talking about it than someone else that has that. Mobiles and portable radios. I wish we had better radios when we got out of the ambulance. A lot of times you lose communication, you lose range. That's where those repeaters would have come into place. But I like the idea of having a portable radio or something on me in case I need help or if I can't get back to my unit and I need things. So the mobile ones are what, of course, mounted in the truck. Some areas I have seen where they have a good repeater system that they won't even have mobile radios in the truck. They use portables for everything. Used to be what they call a VHF frequency, very high band and ultra high band, and that was a lot of time you don't even see them anymore because they were, like I said, I think that they worked to serve their purpose back in the day, but they're so outdated now you rarely even see them anymore. This we talked about the boosters, we transmit, retransmit stuff. Trunking, all that. Like I said, that's not my expertise, even though I've been in it for a long time. I kind of just picked up a radio and talked to it, so I don't want to get you confused on this. Maybe some of y'all can speak up and tell me a lot better information about this. Some of the, for example, the EKG transmit services. Now I do know that a lot of areas they transmit off of cellular towers when you try to ship or submit a 12-lead EKG or transmit one into a base facility. Many of those are cell phone dependent. If you don't have a signal on your cell phone and you're way out in a rural area, which is when you need to really transmit an EKG, a lot of times it won't work because of that. And you'll have to keep trying again when you get closer to a different area. But those are a lot of times cell phone dependent. Bad signal might not work. And some of them, of course, use the satellite phones. Now, the telemetry equipment is, you'll see them a lot of times in hospitals. Instead of having them wired up to an EKG or something like that, these simply just transmit to a station there in the hospital where they can watch these EKG rhythms. We're supposed to have the ability to talk to all other responders in an area. Now, when Homeland Security and all that come out years ago, and some of you had this NIMS training, and it talks about, yeah, all agencies are required to have the same universal frequencies for times of disasters. that they can actually get on and talk to each other. But, that was talked about, and I don't know of any agency that really has that. Back when I used to fly, it seemed like, depending on where we were going, we could or we might not be able to talk to somebody on the ground because there was so many different radio frequencies. Not everybody had the state net. I didn't really realize it until lately, but ambulances where we work at, in some areas, they didn't have the state net radio. And we tried to call them, and I thought, man, that's in a violation. It's like, no, not anymore. They're not required to have a state net radio anymore. I'm thinking, I didn't realize that. So those, as far as having the interoperability, it hadn't really been enforced, and it's like, who's really worried about something like that at that enforceable level? Computer-aided dispatch. I worked dispatch for a number of years, but it's been a long time ago. But some of the technology they have today is they can find the location, geocode it when they transmit it to you in the unit. If you've got that type of luxury, and a lot of information can be sent to you exactly what they're getting. They can type it in notes. As they type in notes, you kind of get them on your screen as well. But there again, everybody doesn't have that. Some people call them DXTs or navigators, but sometimes you don't even have to talk on a radio in a lot of areas to go on scene or to go in or out. A backup plan. One thing about all these high-tech radios and stuff is they're only as good as the electricity that's running them, or if they even have a battery backup system. When I first started dispatching with a high band, they had phone lines run to these big 1,000-foot towers out in the country somewhere. And when I transmitted on the radio, it actually went through the phone line to the tower and then got reprogrammed again like that. Now that's kind of hardwired stuff in that's going to get out there. But when you go to the digital stuff and things like that, because those could run on car batteries or even generators. But some of this other stuff, it gets so complex, and a lot of places don't have a backup plan.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah,
on that?
Please do.
Just so I actually live like 8 miles away from the Nashville bombing.
Yeah,
that happened. If everyone's familiar with that,
exactly. Talk about it.
So that guy, he hit the AT&T server building. All right. So that cut phone lines for everyone. Yeah. And actually, it wasn't until last week that people weren't starting to get their actual 911 back and like to their actual call centers. So these radios that were running off of cell phone signal were done. Yep. They're having to import special towers to come in and get that. And for like literally over a week, there was 0 911 and there was 0 backup plan within this. Like, and you would think that a metropolitan city would have that, but there wasn't. They just started rerouting certain numbers to certain dispatchers and trying to run lines to supplement that. So when you're talking about radios and stuff like that, that can happen. You never think, oh, there's going to be a bombing, and then now you have mass casualty and like literally 0 radio communication because it just so happened to hit the AT&T building, and you're transporting these people to the hospital and you can't talk to anyone. It's pretty scary.
It is, and that was actually the example that I was going to give, and I appreciate you doing that because.
Sorry.
No. I'm glad you did, and because you were there. You hear a lot of the local stuff. Where I only hear the national stuff, but civilization is. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's like that for us as well in Selma in Dallas County in Alabama.
Yeah.
50% of our coverage area does not have service on our radios, and we have actually been shot at quite a few times on scene. So we're pretty much on our own out there.
Yeah.
I would much rather go back to the old ones that you could rely on.
That's my thoughts exactly. The VHF and UHF, because it was reliable and they kept changing it. But it's like in Nashville. I got family that lives there. I lived there for a while out in the Donaldson area. But for this day and time to not have a backup plan, we've become really too reliable on technology, and it's kind of scary with all the things that's going on nowadays. I worked in New Orleans and on the Gulf Coast during Hurricane Katrina, and I was amazed at how fragile civilization is. One event like that, all this other stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, and a lot of people they don't know how to really rely on it. And it's sad if you look around at the people, or when you're driving through traffic, just look at the people that's on their cell phone. It's like And I swear, I think I've known people that's had a relationship. The total relationship was electronic. I don't think they ever had a real actual date or not. But it is kind of sad that stuff's happening. But to not have a backup plan, that is not unheard of at all nowadays. Uh, it is really frightening with that. So I think we all pretty much know how the 911 is supposed to work. You know, someone sees something and calls it in. I've got on scene before and people will be complaining about, hey man, it took y'all forever. It took y'all forever. And they'd go back to review things. And a lot of times everybody always expects someone else to call. It's like, did somebody actually even call at that time? So that goes back to like documentation too. Hey, the call come in at this time. We dispatched the ambulance at this time. So I don't know what, they may have been standing around 30 minutes waiting for somebody to come and nobody actually ever called. So the main line 911, as far as landlines and stuff goes, I do notice that the way some of that used to work, because some of the first 911 calls was generated in this state, I actually answered them. And back then we would say, okay, do you have an emergency? Okay, and we'd send the ambulance. And a lot of times we would, I remember after a big bill of the agency having to buy someone a new front door, that questioning's changed some in the emergency medical dispatch protocol. It's like, where do you need the ambulance? What address do you need the ambulance? Because a lot of people are calling, what is your address? And they'd give them their address, and they didn't say anything about the patient being across the street. So that's kind of some questions that they'll answer. And you might hear people complain when you get to the house. It's like, man, they kept me on the phone answering all kind of questions. They got time for that. So that's actually what they're trying to determine to get straightened out. Now, everybody likes to holler at dispatch. Everybody does. I've been on both sides. And the dispatch likes to holler at the crew. And if you've been on both sides, you can kind of understand the other perspective. But if you've only had one side throughout your career and only seen that perspective, you can't really grasp what everybody else is going through. I've taken calls before on 911. Well, what's wrong, man? Well, my husband's just weak, and I can't get him out of the chair. He's just so weak. So is he breathing? Yeah, he's okay. He just needs help getting up. So we'd send them like no lights, no sirens, and they get there and the crew's like, golly, control. This guy was in cardiac arrest. It's like, well, I'm sorry. That's what I was relaying. What I relayed to you, and we know that always happens. So does anybody work in and I think some of you do, is maybe why you're doing this program, but tiered systems. We're starting to see more and more EMT trucks in our area. They're trying to hire more advanced EMTs because of the shortage of paramedics. This talks about the appropriate crew was sent to the call. Now, if you don't have anybody else, that is okay. You got to send an ambulance. But let's say, for an example, if you're in an area that has EMT trucks, AEM trucks, and paramedic trucks, is there a certain format or something like that y'all would call on who gets what? Will they do a paramedic intercept? Is anybody doing stuff like that right now?
I know in Nashville you have basically you have ambulance, you have Vanderbilt, you got AMR, and all these other like different contracting like ambulances. And what they do is they have advanced EMTs and EMTs, and they usually run non-emergency. I don't forget the technical word for non-emergency, like dialysis transports and stuff like that, and then Nashville Fire actually runs the 911 calls, and their minimum is paramedic AEMT. They don't have a single EMT working on the trucks, really. I think there might be like one or two. I met him at Nashville General Hospital, and I think he was kind of grandfathered in. But their standard now is they won't even, if you're a basic, they won't even let you on their truck. You have to go work for the private companies and do non-911. So that's what they're going to now.
Okay. I noticed in some areas I've worked in, like I've worked for Acadian, and if we'd get sent to Baton Rouge EMS would run a call, and then they determined that it wasn't really medically necessary, then they'd call Acadian to come transport. That kind of like, well, it kind of was kind of like, okay, well, that ain't fair, but that's the way some places do. En route communications, this is kind of goes with situational awareness, trying to find out more. And like I heard one dispatcher tell a truck last night, look, that's all I have. I'm sorry. But the truck guy, the guy was being like, well, I need more. I need more. She's like, I'm sorry. I just don't have it. So if you can get information, then by all means, just try it. But some responsibility does go on you as far as, trying to get to the call as much as possible. One thing you need to think about is being on a truck. You got one call to worry about at a time, whereas your dispatcher may have 7 or 8 going on at one time. So it's just some kind of double perspective there. Area I work in now, we call on the state net to give report. You just got to be kind of course, aware of what you can say and cannot say. You don't need to be saying names except on the radio. The transmitting the PCR, the patient care report to the emergency department. I know ours is we use the Tuck books. We've got another format that we use as well. We submit the report and they get it immediately. It actually comes out in their fax or in their electronic system. So this is a lot better than the paper charts that we used to have. Now, consulting with medical control. A lot of places have some pretty decent protocols with a lot of standing orders to where you may not have to call that much. I did talk about last week of by all means, running something by a physician. If you know what your training says, you know what you have in front of you, but you may have a different idea, or you may want to run it by them. Hey, here's why I would rather not do that, or so don't be afraid to consult with med control. A lot of them I've talked to said, man, I wish more people would call in. So whether you do it on the radio or a telephone, that depending on what's in your area. However, it is a good idea. It should be on a recorded means, a recorded type phone call, because you want to, you might say, hey, well, the doc told me to do this. And the doc's like, no, I didn't. They take it back. Yeah, he did. Of course, if you did something brutally wrong anyway, that's both of you in trouble. But those things need to be recorded. Calling them on the way in, that, a lot of people are like, well, that's a courtesy. I don't have to do that. But there again, think about what information do you want? Would you just like to be told to go to a call? Say, hey, I need you to go up there. They need an ambulance. Why? Well, I don't know. Just go do it. Think about it. You wouldn't want that part either. So reports are good. It's good to give, and to me, it's good responsibility, because you don't want to come in with that pediatric trauma patient. Here you go. You want them to have as much time as possible, or that stroke patient, or that STEMI patient, or you may have a patient that's being combative, so they can get everything ready. Radio reports, like I said, I use the L chart method, and I kind of give my reports to that as well. So you need to have I'm sure we've all heard those reports over the radio, to where it just kind of goes on and on. It doesn't make any sense, but I can tell you, a lot of ERs, when they start hearing that, they just set it down and walk away. So think about, and you can listen to other people's reports, learn from them, or learn what to do or what not to do, or what could they have told you in that report that might help you make a better decision. So when you listen to other reports, just use that. You don't probably start no confrontation running with them, but you listen to the ones that's like, hey, I got a clear picture from that. Why do I have a clear picture? Well, here's what they said. So you use that to think about that. So like I said, when I give reports, plain and simple, I'll say, hey, we were called out for a chest pain. Patient's complaining of this. Here's what led up to it. Here's what I saw. Here's what I did. Here's what happened. Do you require any further? And a lot of times they will, or they will not. A lot of times what they've been asking lately is, do they have an IV or blah, blah, because they want to send them to triage because as busy as everybody is. So the communicating part, just think about it. You don't want to be caught all blind, and neither do they. So I'm not sure how, I haven't seen, our system is writing in protocols for advanced EMTs. I haven't seen those yet, but when they do get them out, remember we said standing orders is what you can do without having to call in. And hey, you have to do this without thinking. If that was the case, they'd have monkeys or something on the ambulance that we didn't have to worry about thinking or making skill choices. They are called guidelines. And it's pretty simple, like, well, do you have to do every one of them? Maybe not. Well, why didn't you do that? Just be able to say why. Say why you did or why you wasn't. but they're simply a guideline. Have any of you ever had an emotional crisis or a bad call to where your judgment got clouded? That's what training and protocols are for. It's like, well, wait a minute, you find yourself, you got this 5-year-old pediatric trauma, and you're like, what, you find yourself going, okay, what about this, and you go, whoa, wait a minute, I got to do this, I got to do that. That's when you go back to those systematic steps that's in your training, your guidelines. That is what those are for, is when your judgment is clouded, and it gives you something to fall back on. And even on the charts, on the walls of a lot of major hospitals, trauma centers, STEMI centers, what do they have on the wall a lot of time? They have those guidelines and steps up on the wall. So when you're talking to a doctor or physician, don't use the codes. They probably don't know what 10 codes or anything are. I wish we'd get away from codes. 10 codes, some places use them, but people don't. Here's an important one. Once you receive an order, repeat it back exactly what you was told. Because I've had them come back and say, no, wait a minute, I mean this. So he might be halfway, or he or she may be halfway looking to you because they may have other calls going on. So when they repeat an order to you, or when they give you an order, repeat it back to them. And you don't automatically just do something because the doctor said it. If the doctor tells you to do something and it was wrong and you do it anyway, then you're just as guilty as they are. For example, doc, this patient had Viagra 3 hours ago. Now he's having chest pain. And the doc says, well, I need you to go ahead and give 3 nitro. What has that done to people in the past? It's killed them. So that might not be an order that you would want to follow through without running it back to him. And then again, hey, I just didn't feel comfortable doing this for him or something. Be able to say why. But if you do something knowingly wrong, then you can't get in trouble the same way that they are. So it may be small hospitals. If you work in a rural area and you got a small hospital on the way to a cardiac arrest or something like that, I may give them a heads up. Especially services should notify hospitals or receiving facilities. Hey, we've got an MCI going on. We got when I was a manager on the coast, like, hey, we got a 6-car pileup. I got this many patients. What can you handle? A lot of times they'll say, hey, we can handle 3 green, 2 red, this. So we would try to have that plan in place to be able to do that. So, and that comes with working with your facilities ahead of time, not waiting until the time it happens, but hopefully you got a good outreach team that can go work with these facilities and try to get on the same page with that. And I've had them tell me on the phone, well, what does green mean? What does red mean? I'm like, look, I don't have time to tell you that right there, get into an education lesson right now. So that's why it's good to work ahead of time. So the patient care report. Wait till my backup catches up with me. Legal document. Just remember that this is a legal document. Have any of you ever been called in on a deposition or anything like that? I have, and it's worked in my favor, and it ain't really never worked against me, but I've had them call things out on it that where I really learned from it. That screen that you see up there, it says tablet PCR. It's on one of the Panasonic Tough books. I've worked with different services, and that format may be changed around a little bit. However, a lot of it's the same information. It's just in different areas. They're formatted differently. So this being a legal document, you shouldn't take pictures of it or anything like that. But what is in here is what's done and what they'll rely on it. I had a physician, not a physician, but had a report one time, and they asked me, did I have any mistakes in my report, or was all my training or treatment accurate? And I'm like, to the best of my understanding. They said, is your report correct? I said, as far as I know, yes, it is. So this defense lawyer, I was a witness for the plaintiff, and this defense lawyer said, Mr. Marshall, what kind of vehicle was this person in? I said, they were in a motorhome. And if this format right here, when it goes to cause of crash or vehicle type, or cause of injury, in alphabetical order, it'll have something like motorcycle crash, motor vehicle crash and go down through there. Those are just millimeters apart. I accidentally hit motorcycle crash. And she pointed out that because I'd done that, it made the whole report wrong. And if she looked hard enough, what other mistakes would she find? So, you got to think about stuff like that. Recheck yourself. And, don't just do a report and submit it. Go back and look over it, have your partner read it. And what you're looking at that point is, does it make sense? Does it say what happened? Does it say why I did what I did? A second set of eyes sometime before you send it is helpful and good to save you trouble later on. So, and this should record everything that happened from the time you picked up this patient. At one point, they got away from us putting every detail down, but nowadays, I've gone back to documenting a lot, like what a patient told me the other night away from the rest of her crew. Possible abuse was going on, so I documented that conversation. Because when we got to the hospital, she denied it, but somebody else was present. So that might be when you want to pull the doc or somebody out and talk to them about it. So you want to record that information in there. Can there be too much? There can be information in there that's not pertinent. Like while we were there, the neighbors were having a fight. I don't think that would be pertinent. But when I have seen myself and other coworkers or associates called in for stuff, they would ask them, why did you not document that? Why did you not document that? So anything that has that may be a player in what you got in front of you, it needs to be in there. And if I've had people say, well, you don't need to put all that in there, like, no, I would feel more comfortable with it in there, because there again, you may be asked why. Military time, at this point in the game, you should be able to do that. Understand military time, because that's what that is not confusing. Whereas if you have 7 o'clock on the report, then they're going to then you'll have to differentiate, is it 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. But if you put 7 a.m. or 1900, for sure, hey, it was 7 a day at 7 at night. So practice report writing. Read other people's reports if possible, or if have your partner say, hey, can I check you on this, or do you mind if I go over and review this? So you need to be able to be able to do that. And like I said, one way that I would learn to what I need to say or what I need to write is looking at other people's reports. And if a question came up, hey, I'm not getting it, then they may have left something out. So that's just the way I've learned from it, and listening to other people's reports. Okay, I got the picture. That was good. Or, man, I don't know what the hell they were talking about. Why don't I know what they're talking about? Well, here's what wasn't said. So think about that, how you can use that to your advantage next time. Make sure that, a lot of people are like, well, this ain't English class, but I'm telling you, I've seen people tore apart on punctuation and spelling, and never get to the medical error, because they would paint it to the jury or the judge saying, hey, if this person cannot do basic English or basic spelling, how can they be entrusted to do advanced medical life support? And I've seen it not even get past that point to where they end up doing a settlement. So let's say, like, objective information. That is stuff that is there. That's not judgmental. That's what you see. Like a blood pressure, that's objective. Subjective information, that's what you see, that's what you need to record, that's what you write on. Like the lady I told you earlier, she said, subjectively, she said nothing was wrong with her. But objectively, this lady was breathing 33 times a minute. That's what it is. That's what I can't change. Subjective, you'll see a subjective area and an objective area in these electronic charts. A subjective simply means information that has been told to you. It can't be seen, but it's what they tell you. It's what they tell you that's going on. That's subjective. Hey, the patient's complaining of chest pain and shortness of breath. Objectively, patient did have, let's say, like increased work of breathing, or they were tachypneic. That's an objective finding. So these reports need to be accurate, and they need to be legible. They need to be able to write it, because they will go back on, hey, your knowledge of how that you put this stuff together. Like I said, there's a lot of different designs out there. The image tree and stuff, that's what we used on a helicopter. The one on the top up there seems like what I've used at other ground services. But a lot of the same information because the CMN and the CMS determines what's needed, a lot of trauma study groups and statistic groups have determined what's needed. So a lot of this information is the same. It's just in different areas, and you just got to get familiar with where that's at. So these are usually transmitted into some people. We try to do them as quick as we can. Some people have 24 hours to get it in. So just find out what that is in your area, but it needs to be in as quick as possible. Now, bias or personal opinions. You know, I'll say, hey, when I was before I learned better ways to do things, I've wrote personal opinions in there. This patient, you know, I'd kind of like to say, well, this patient did not need an ambulance. Now, that's my personal opinion. Okay, they might not have needed one, but then you're kind of being, you're putting a subjective matter. Are you writing down what you saw? No, you're writing down, you're giving something that can be kind of judgmental, but you don't want to say, hey, they did not need this person does not need an ambulance. Don't need to really say that, but you can say, hey, this patient was alert and oriented, ambulatory at scene without assistance, appeared to be in acute distress. Now that said that said they don't need an ambulance, but it was in a PC objective manner. Proper spelling, grammar, accurate terminology. Now, the next part that we have tonight is a very, very short part on terminology, but medical terminology, if you're going to use it, it needs to be correct. It's actually like learning its own simple language, but medical terminology can really dictate to you what's going on. If I tell you, hey, you've got a periumbilical pulsatile mass, then you know peri means around, umbilical means where. What does pulsatile mean? What's mass? You know, you can pretty much say, well, this patient's probably got a AAA. So knowing your terminology is paramount. I was a big stickler on that. So it doesn't go over a whole lot in this, but it's in your book and your other resources, but prefixes, things like that can pretty much tell what you need to be doing. Some places where I go, I pick up a patient and I might see in their patient record the PCR report where the other ambulance brought them in. So this should be kept together. It shows a continuity of care. Hey, what happened when the first hands got laid on them and when we dropped them off? Education. When I was a clinical manager, I would take patient care reports, of course, take out all of the identifying factors to where they couldn't tell who it was or anything like that. And I would simply put this up on a board. Hey, and not to, you know, and it wasn't meant to call people. I would put up very good ones, and then I'd put up some that I don't want to say were bad. However, they left questions. I'm like, what is this not telling you? But when I would get a good one, you know, I would put it up on a board and I would say, hey, here's what they found. Here's what they did. I mean, do y'all see? Does this paint the picture? Do you have any questions after reading this report? And you know, they said, no. They said, yeah, I do. Okay, well, what is it? And then see, that would be something that we could all learn from. Okay, well, maybe that would have helped out in this report. Also, what else does it do? We all like to get paid. Money can't come into your account unless it goes into your employer's account. So we don't want to ever rely on these reports. But for example, we want to be able to say, hey, we want to prove to the payer, the insurance company, Medicare, Medicaid, we want to be able to prove to them that we provided a service and it was medically necessary. So, hey, give us money so we can pay our people. Now, you know, I'll talk about this later in some of the other scenarios, but you do not want to lie on a report. If the patient gets up and walks down and sits on that stretcher, then they probably don't need it. And, you know, I'll put patient ambulatory to stretcher without assistance secured. I would say that because I am not lying. Now, let's say the patient can sit up. That doesn't automatically mean that they don't qualify for a stretcher. You would ask yourself simply like, well, this patient has, you know, they could sit up in a wheelchair. They do fine in a wheelchair. But if they're in a moving vehicle, if you were to put them in a car or a wheelchair and they were to slam on brakes, would they be able to support themselves? Are they going to be able to sit up in a seated position while in a moving vehicle. That's stuff that you might would put in there. No, they don't. They require support. They're posturally unstable. They require support. They require straps to be able to support them in place, and they must remain in a semi-fowler condition. That's just things that you might would want to put in or to relay this information to them. And of course, more on that later. Any changes that happen in the patient, don't just forego it. Everything, a lot of times stuff don't happen. You want to pay attention to your patient. And when I say this literally, because I've seen it to where I saw a medic one time, he was, well, I didn't see it, didn't happen with me, but I was a supervisor at the time. And he left a hospital, got in a jump seat, wrote his report, never even looked at the ambulance. When they got to the nursing home, his partner opened it up, and the patient had died somewhere in between those two locations. So, I mean, how are you going to document that? So changes in condition. Hey, I gave the patient a bolus of pressure come up, they maintained well, or the patient seemed to get more lethargic en route. They could answer what happened and where they are, but they didn't know the exact time or the events leading up to that. They knew that originally. So you want to do that. The chief complaint, mental state, a GCS should follow right pretty much in, I usually try to give it pretty much at the heading of the report. So you don't want to go through a big long report and say, oh, by the way, the patient's got a GCS of 8. Okay, wait a minute. That first, then they didn't hear anything before that. But if you say right ahead, hey, I'm coming in, patient, we got the call as a seizure. We got there, the patient found unresponsive. Right now, I have a GCS of 8. That's going to get people gathering around the radio. But level of consciousness needs to be stated pretty much at the beginning. Of course, the vital signs, findings, and what happened. You also might want to start getting in the habit of, I usually give my ETA right at the beginning of the report too, especially like when I was flying, because you didn't know how long, I mean, I could start giving a report in a helicopter in Poplarville. By the time I finish it, I can be almost Hattiesburg. So that's why a lot of times I say, hey, this is so-and-so, 8-minute ETA, and then give my report from there. The narrative. The more and more of these reports now have drop-down boxes to where you can actually select, like, for example, they'll have like a chest pain, then it'll drop down. What does it feel like? Then another one will drop down. Does it radiate? A narrative should support, if you have the drop-down boxes, a narrative should support things that may be in there or may not have a drop-down box for. Because what will happen if you do the exact charting, if you put in a narrative exactly, or try to put in a narrative exactly everything that you did a drop down on, in other words, repeating yourself, 9 out of 10 times you'll make a conflict. You'll be something that changed. Well, up here, and I've seen them do it. Well, up here you wrote down this here, but up here you put this was in place. Or up here you checked left leg, but however you report you wrote right leg. So if there's a drop down box for it, a lot of times the drop down box they'll have a place to write a note. It is a little bit more time consuming like that. And they want you to use the drop down boxes in a lot of places because that's where they get your statistics and be able to focus in on stuff. However, just be careful. Your narrative should support things that don't have a drop down box for, or just kind of reinstate a few things. Like in my drop down boxes, I can put on there nasal cannula, 4 liters, IV, left arm, 23 or 24, or 22 gauge at this rate. Now, in my treatment section, I might just write IV therapy because they can go back to that charting part and they can see all of that. But if I start writing down again, there's a big chance I'm going to conflict myself. And if you conflict one part of the report, the whole report's wrong. So that's just things I've seen in the past. And this is the way they want to try to get people documenting toward. Another thing is if you do a drop-down box assessment, there's no sense in the assessment part. Like the other night, I clicked when it got down to right extremities, it had on their motor sensory deficient, was the right arm, weakness, no grip. I checked that and then compared to the left arm, I would put where everything was normal. So in my report, where I did my assessment, I might put on there something about there was, we're talking about a stroke patient. So I want to say, what did I find to help me state that I'm looking at a stroke patient? Well, I put down in the drop-down boxes, let's say left-sided paresis, plegia, arm dripped, stuff like that. So when it comes to my assessment, I might want to say, well, I don't remember seeing something in there as far as facial droop as drop-down. May have been, but let's say I didn't see it. I put on there, hey, patient has left-sided drooping, left side deficits. Let's say they had symmetrical chest rise and fall, abdomen was non-tender, distal pulses were positive, however, sensation was altered left side. That might be all I put in my assessment part, because I've already did the drop-down boxes to cover everything. So you see where, maybe hopefully you can see where I'm talking about. If you start writing it down again, you're probably going to confuse, get left, right mixed up or something like that. So that's just something to think about. Observations at the scene, their final disposition, hey, they refused care, I transported them, but they wouldn't let me do any treatment. You need to make that out. Hey, you're not starting no IV on me. Okay. Patient refused to let me start an IV. They can refuse any or all part of it. So if they decide to do that, then oh well, that must be on them. It is a good idea also, and the reason that I'll put in these extra points is because it's happened. Patient taken to upon arrival, we were directed to like ER room 3. Patient was moved to the hospital bed via draw sheet with the aid of staff. Hospital bed rails were raised. Report given to Jane Doe RN. And the reason that I do it like that is because I've had people say something go wrong and the nurse tried to throw you under the bus. Oh, nobody told me nothing. Or the patient rolled out of bed. Well, they just put them in there. So I've seen that. Well, they didn't tell me anything. And the patient coded. They didn't tell me anything. So they're going to throw you under the bus and save their butt. So that's why it's a good idea to say it like that. Personal belongings, if you have to bring them, make sure there again that you document. Like I'll say, a patient had a brown purse. It was uninventoried by crew, set on silver tray by patient's bed in room 6. Notified nurse of the purse, because people think we like to steal false teeth and things of that nature. I had a pedestrian hit by auto a week ago, and I saw the hospital police get the wallet, but I get called 3 days after, hey Lynn, where's his wallet? And it's like, okay, well, did you read my report? And they didn't. It said on there, given to John Doe, hospital police officer, such and such. So be able to document that stuff on there. If you leave something out, as far as errors, you don't want to cover it up. Now, we used to be able to do draw a line through it and then go on about it. You don't want to falsify anything for sure. Now, let's say you submit a trip electronically and then realize, oh, I left something out. Don't ever change anything in that original report. They may send it back to you and have you to do what's called an addenda. And that's when you might want to state, error, I stated that the patient had this when they really had that, or I didn't start it was actually not a 22 gauge, but it was an 18 gauge. And these are just some examples. They don't ever want you to change the original part because it may look like they're covering something up, but I was do an addenda to it. So if you make a mistake, for example, I had a guy tell me one time, he said, hey man, my partner was putting together some D50 for me and I went ahead and pushed it, but then I looked at it and I gave the guy an amp of bicarb instead of D50. They both, hey, is that, they didn't do the 5 rice, they didn't verify, but it is a big syringe. They look similar out of the box, so I could see where that happened at. And the guy told me, and I said, well, you got to put that in there because, hey, they pushed bicarb instead of D50. Is that a big deal? In a full-grown adult? Nah, it's really not. But let's say they discovered that later on and you didn't report it, then they're gonna start coming after you. What else have you covered up? And something like that could go with you the rest of your career. A lot of times people will have they'll document things that never really happened. For example, I only did one IV attempt, but they get over here and they say, well, dang, what's all, he's got 4 holes in his arm. What's that from? Well, David, I didn't want to report that I've missed all them IVs. It's going to go against me. But no, you need to document that, especially if it's like it goes to the patient dies and the coroner or the person doing the autopsy, he's going to want to know. He's like, hey, was he here already, or did this patient shoot up with needle marks, or did somebody kill him? So, you got to swallow your pride. Like, no, man, I tried 4 times to get an IV and I didn't get it, and I tried them all over here on this side. That needs to be documented. So, all procedures are documented because it goes back to where they have to start finding like insurance codes, in other words, in order to get paid. Now, I've heard this excuse for years, and it's like, well, that's the business officer's problem. Let them figure it out. Has anybody, I know I have, ever got a bill or an incorrect medical bill or something insurance refused to pay because somebody didn't document right and do their job? Think about it, that because the way you document something could cause the insurance company not to pay or to reduce the benefits. And when it was simply maybe you were being lazy or you didn't chart all the appropriate procedures. So just think about that. Even though you're busy or whatever, I've had to appeal things before because I didn't get paid. Like, well, sir, this was never documented. I got charged for a bunch of lab results one time. Or I'm sorry, I got a bunch of lab fees one time. And understanding documentation on how it was to work, I said, well, okay, well, let me see the patient report. So they gave me the patient report. I said, okay, y'all charged me for all these labs. They said, yes, sir. Well, where's the hell's the results at? Where's the results? They couldn't provide results, so they took off about $2,800 in lab fees. So, knowing your stuff like that. So if you're going to have lab results, same way if you're going to have like medications, you need to document what the results are. Some incidences that the CMS and things look at. They look at certain terms about whether or not they're going to pay a bill. Now, and I actually saw this rejection one time in a meeting, but the paramedic put reason for stretcher was gunshot wound. Believe it or not, they don't deem that a reason for stretcher. What they do recognize is the patient had uncontrollable hemorrhage. The patient had potential shock. He required, they recognize shock, they recognize hemorrhage, but as far as gunshot wound itself, it didn't get it. So when they went back and refiled and it was hemorrhage from a gunshot wound, they paid it. And that's stuff that a lot of us are never taught. And I've never really understood the disconnect between like the business office, compliance, and stuff like that, and the people on the streets. They want to always holler at us for stuff that we really didn't know. So that's just some information that I kind of like throwing in there. Or the patient needed to be restrained because they were a danger. That's a paying thing. They required emergency treatment while being transported. I took one the other night and nothing really happened to him. However, the reason that he was going by ambulance is this guy had his medication wasn't working anymore. He was a pediatric, so he had to go to a pediatric center. And why is the ambulance needed? The kid sat there and played a video game. But, I'm like, well, why am I doing this? But then I get to thinking, man, if that was my kid or whatever, I'd want the insurance to pay. So what they put on there was he had an uncontrolled seizure yet from unknown etiology. He has the potential for having seizures again. He needs to be transported by an ALS paramedic that has this means to manage this patient. So you see how that would get paid versus, something else. Now, it's not lying, but you're trying to maximize that person's benefits and get it paid. Just think if it was you would want it definitely taken care of. You don't want somebody being lazy or something like that for it. One of the biggest reasons EMS people are sued are for airway issues and refusals. We all have the basic right to refuse what happens to us, supposedly. So, thorough documentation on a refusal. I've seen people say, well, I let my EMT right to refusal, and this is nothing toward the EMT. However, it's kind of like they're discounting it. It's like, okay, well, you were the lead person on the scene. You need to write this because if let's say the patient needed further cardiac evaluation, but they refused. Well, sir, your EMT wrote a report. Where were you? What did you do? Well, why did your EMT write the report? I mean, they can, if you look at, okay, why, if your EMT's like, why are you writing a report? Why don't you let me write it? Well, there's your why. It's nothing really against them. Helping them write it, yeah, okay, I can see that part. However, a lot of people blow these refusal narratives off. If you're not able to persuade them to go, then you need to document that. You need to document what was said. If at all possible, have them sign it. If they refuse to sign it, hopefully a witness will be there to sign it. Well, they're not verifying that, hey, yeah, all you said is true. They're just simply saying, hey, the patient refused to sign the report. A lot of them won't sign it. And I've been on areas where fire departments and police have told me, look, man, we were told not to sign anything. Okay, just document. That's when it goes back. Just document the best you can. Nobody here would sign it for me. Everybody refused. Okay, we'll just document. Some places require you to call medical control about getting a refusal. Some areas will only require you to do that if you've already started ALS care, like you start an IV, you give D50, they wake up. Some places will say, well, you need to call to get an order to DC the advanced life support or life care. Even if they do refuse care, you must complete the PCR. State that, hey, here's what happened. I did express to them if they needed to go be seen to the hospital. However, they were fine. I'll usually say something like transport was offered and strongly advised. Patient was advised of the consequences of refuse. However, they still declined to go. Now, I usually just leave it like that, and I'll tell them I did advise them to call EMS if the situation changed, and that covers a lot of other stuff as far as like well, I'll call 911 or I'll go to the hospital. I'll just simply say, hey, call EMS again if the situation changed. They could even just change their mind. If they will not allow you to do an assessment, put on patient refused assessment. You can't do a full set of vital signs on everybody, but if you're going to let them refuse, their level of consciousness is a type of vital sign. Hey, they answered all questions appropriately. No, I wasn't able to take a blood pressure, wasn't able to take a pulse, but they were breathing 16 times a minute without effort, did not appear to be in distress. They had symmetrical range of motion of all extremities. From what I could see visually, there was no trauma. So there's some things that you could, put on there without doing a hands-on. So some things have to be reported as far as gunshot wounds, dog bites will get the authorities out in a lot of areas. Infectious diseases, a lot of times the hospital will report that to someone, but there's some diseases that are reportable. For example, I tested positive for positive TB skin test back in the 90s, and I'm not supposed to take the test anymore. However, I had a manager last year that was like, no, you got to get tested. I didn't do the skin test, but I did the blood test. And when the blood tests come back positive, they had to report that to the State Department of Health. And I had to go back through all this again and say, well, look, that happened in 1999. I had the screenings. I had the year-long INH immunization stuff, so I'm good. And they're like, oh, well, you shouldn't have never took this. I'm like, oh, well, okay. Suspected physical or sexual abuse. I had a patient tell me the other night about some stuff going on. So I wrote in my report, and I relayed it to the doctor and the nurse supervisor that was there. In some states, I know Mississippi's one of them, it does fall on you to actually report signs of abuse and things like that. If you look up the law, it'll come out and says you are personally responsible for seeing this being done. Now, you can say, hey, well, the hospital said they were going to do it. Dr. So-and-so and nurse so-and-so said that they were taking this up. They were calling DHS. They were reporting it. But if you don't get an answer like that, I have called them myself to follow up to make sure something was done. And that does fall on you as a medical professional. I know in the state of Mississippi, I'm not sure about the other areas. Maybe if somebody can find that out, let me know. It'd help everybody else. You should document mutual aid that was there. Who was there before you? What was done? And if you turn somebody over, a patient over for like, I turned them over to, I was a intermediate truck. I turned them over to a paramedic level so-and-so. They took over. Here's what I done up to that point. I turned them over to flight services. Here's what I done up to that point. So be sure that that is all documented as well. Now, sometimes mass casualties are handled a little bit different. I've seen you got 40 or 50 kids on a school bus, minor injuries, nobody specifically hurt. We've done what they call a blanket refusal. That was a accepted way of doing it in our area at that time, and simply get everybody's name, date of birth, write a general statement, and a lot of time a school official or somebody like that can accept care of that. And we've had to use stuff like that in MCIs, and there again we were able to say why we did it. Remember that word, why. Submitting a report, like I said, as soon as possible. Some places have cameras on the computer where you can take pictures and scan that in. Other places have to where their own little scanners, you can pull it up. But all of that stuff after the hard copies, it needs to be put into a special locked Dropbox, or someplace things may need to be shredded. Anything that has been signed, EMS should get the original signature, and you never throw away anything with an original signature on it. There should be a designated place at your station in order, or someplace to be able to drop those reports in. All right, comments, concerns, or questions on that, on this one. This next one is is real short, so we'll kind of fish kind of early a little bit about that tonight. Let me pull this one up. We skipped right over. Okay. I'm trying to get my new one to pop up here. Give me a little bit of trouble. All right. All right. All right, a little quick lecture tonight on terminology. I talked to you earlier about how medical terminology is really, it's really a different language. I think it's a very important aspect of medical terminology. I mean, medical education, using these big words, as some like to say, is paramount. Had I flew down to get a patient one time, and I simply asked, was the patient febrile? And I don't know where this guy got his license. He's like, do what? I said, febrile, are they febrile? He said, man, quit using those big doctor words. And this guy had a gold patch on his shoulder. I'm thinking, needless to say, just based on that, he lost all credibility with me. But medical terminology, it uses anatomic relations as far as abbreviations and suffixes, and it hones you in on what you're talking about. A lot of it's Greek and Latin, and it's usually described every aspect of medical care. For example, I gave you an example earlier to word. A lot of times, like the word algia means pain. Now, let's say if you have, you put, what does neuro mean? It means nerves. So if you have neuralgia, what do you have? Pneumo means air. Thorax means chest. Pneumothorax, what does that mean? And I've heard some people say, hey, pneumo means air, head means cephalic. You got somebody over here that's pneumocephalic. And so we've probably known somebody that's had that before. So as far as from the Greek, Latin references, eponyms, it's the name of a disease or device or procedure or drug based on the person who invented it. For example, like the McBurney point, like assessing for places in the abdomen, looking for appendicitis. Foley catheter. Foley is actually not a correct term. Foley is somebody's name. We've always said, hey, they got a Foley in. The correct word would actually be urinary catheter, indwelling urinary catheter, but Foley itself is actually the man's name that invented that. So hopefully you learned something just out of that. There's a type of suction device that we like to use, and it was named after the person that invented it. So homonyms are words that pronounce the same way but have different meanings. An example, ilium. You got ilium and ilium, like you got ILEUM, and then you've got ILIUM. One has to do with the hip, and the other one has to do with a junction in the gut. Antonyms, pairs of word roots, prefixes, and suffixes have the opposite meaning. For example, MAL, mal means bad, malnourishment. Ad means toward, or ab, away. He adduct means move your arm toward it. He abducted away. It means he pushed it away. So EU means good. Euphoria, it's a good feeling. Synonyms, pairs of word roots, prefixes, and suffixes that have the same or almost same meaning. For example, pneumonologist, pulmonologist, both of them mean lung doctors. Anytime you hear the term ology, that means study of. Cardiology, neurology. Prefix, that's the word that you get up front, suffixes at the end. Some examples of prefixes, sub, like for example, subcutaneous, substernal, subdural. It means below. And hypo means low or below normal. You got hypovolemia, which is low blood volume, and you've got hypoglycemia, low sugar. Hypo means below. Now, sometimes you got a numerical prefix, and that is something like octo means 8, like an octogenarian means somebody that is between 80 and 89 years old. So a lot of times you've been using this stuff without even realizing it, but it is important to know this information. And to me, I think it's just a basic requirement of being in the medical field. If you're going to be in the medical field, then you need to know medical words and what they mean. That's something you should pride yourself on. So suffix is at the end of the word, and it changes or adds to the word's meaning. And for example, procedures. if you see something with the end of it, like ASE, like lipase, that is, ACE means it's an enzyme. It's an enzyme. And enzyme means it's a catalyst. It causes something to happen. So you've got lipase. Another one would be something like these are parts of speech like isthmia. Pipnea means difficulty. You got dyspnea, which means breathing. Pnea on the end of it. Then you've got difficulty breathing. Word roots, the basic meaning. For example, it's usually in the middle, surrounded by a prefix or ended by a suffix. But some basic terms you need to get down on is like cyanosis. Osis means a condition that is present. Cyan means blue. Cyanosis is blue. It's not white. It's not red. Cyanosis means blue. So you can have pale, you can have white, but if it's not blue, then it's not cyanosis. Leuco means white. You got your leukocytes, your white blood cells. Erythro means red. Cero means yellow or orange. Think of like cirrhosis. Melano means black or color. Another one is ALB, also means white. Think of albino. And chlor, CHLOR, means green. You got like chlorophyll in plants, or it also has to do with bile products coming from the gallbladder, because it does have a greenish color to it. Now we'll start combining words. It is kind of like English fashion in a way. But for example, you combine words, and it helps. You got more complex terms out of it. So like osteopathic. Pathic means condition of, study of. Osteo is means bone. Another one is pathy. For example, it's a condition or disease. Neuropathy. You got a disease of the nerves. And think of the words like site, S-Y, or C-Y-T, cyto, means cell. Gastro, anything to do with gastro, you've got to think the stomach or the GI system. So these are just, once you hear that term anywhere, gastro is related to the stomach. Now, they also use that to refer to other items in like reference to the stomach. The way that the stomach looks, you got a muscle on the back of your leg called the gastrocnemius, and they said, well, why is gastro in there? And they said, well, that's because that muscle actually looks like a stomach. So I guess they were drawing at straws for that one. Compound words, basic meaning, and it goes on from there as far as when you add something to it, like electrocardiogram. So electro deals with the heart. It's a gram. It means it makes a recording or an image, like radiogram or radiologist. Thermometer, heat. Meter means measure. Now, rules that change a medical term from singular to plural, things that you really don't think about. But for example, single words usually end with an A, but if you add an E on the end of it, like vertebrae or vertebrae, another word would be simple like diagnosis, SIS, and if you get more than one diagnosis, it becomes diagnoses. Apex, like for the heart or the lungs, if you got one, you got apex. If you got two, you got apices. So it's just kind of an idea to give you how those plural words can work with that. Body structure, the way that somebody presents to you. When you describe a patient, you don't describe your right, your left. You describe that if you were in that patient's shoes, what would it look like then? It's the patient's right, the patient's left, the patient's front. We need to learn these planes and know that anterior toward the front, posterior toward the back. Sometimes when the doctors order an x-ray, they'll say, I need an AP and a lateral. So AP means they want to take it from the front to the back. So it covers both areas like that. So you got the ventral area is the back, dorsal area is the back. These areas they help you define where something's actually going to describe it. So become familiar with it's called the topographic anatomy, and be able to divide the planes up. And they get even broke down a lot further than this in some more advanced books. But know that cranial is toward the head, caudal is toward the tail. That's very basic anatomy and stuff that pretty paramount that you need to know about. And I'd recommend that people study the book, even outside sources, but anatomy and physiology is very important. So different cavities, areas of the body that have these special names, like you got your cranial cavity, that means it contains something. It's a space available for containing something. A cranial cavity, thoracic cavity, the abdominal cavity, the pelvic cavity, all those are divided up and contain organs for that area. The pleural cavity, that's where the lungs are. Then you've got the pericardial cavity. All those are inside the thoracic cavity. What separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity? That's where your diaphragm is in place. So you think of dorsal and ventral. Where have you heard that before? When they describe fish, they have a dorsal fin, which is the large one on the back, or the ventral fin, which is along the front. So knowing these planes and being able to describe them is going to give you a lot more respect with other professionals, and it cuts down a lot of wonderment with that. So we want to talk about describing. You see, like the patient's right. You need to know midline, anterior, front, the difference between distal and proximal. Now, the distal means further away from the reference point, and proximal means closer to the center, the body's center line. Now, a lot of people get this confused. I'll ask them, okay, if you can see this guy right here, it's got the elbow. The elbow is proximal to the wrist. And I would actually confuse people. I'm like, okay, well, what's the wrist proximal to? Well, wait a minute. They said they get confused with that. The wrist is proximal to the fingers. The shoulder is proximal to the elbow. The elbow is distal to the shoulder. So that's the way to get those terms down. Just stop and think about it. Now, medial, anything medial is toward the midline of the body. Now, let's look at this guy's chest, for example. Let's look at his left pec area right there at his nipple. So if you look at using the patient's left and right as your reference, the patient's nipple is medial to the shoulder, but it's lateral to the xiphoid process. You get what I mean with that? Medial means toward. So if you're comparing that nipple toward the arm, it is medial. If you compare that nipple toward the sternum, it is lateral because it's toward the outside. Same way with being inferior is away from the head. Superior means nearer to the head. Inferior is away from it. Superior is near it. Your knee is superior to your foot. Your knee is inferior to your hip. So that basic guidelines be able to relate it to all parts of the body. As far as directional terms, get in the habit of doing it as far as the patient referring to that. People will still get confused in it. You're trying to give a report, they'll turn around and say, "Oh, wait, no, well, you mean that? You mean that? Yeah, that's what I mean." It's always been that way. That's what it is. It's the patient's right and left that we're referring to. Flexion and extension. Flexion is when something contracts toward the midline. Extension is when it goes away from the midline. If you look up in the air, raise your chin up, you're extending. If you pull your chin down to your breastbone, you're flexing your head. the same way with abduction and adduction. And the way I used to remember that is that if I was going to add anything to myself, I would bring my arm toward me. It's like if I had a bunch of cookies on the table and I brought it toward me, I'm adding the amount of cookies that I have, so it's adduction. And if and abduct, okay, what does that mean? I'm thinking, well, abduction means not adding it to it. It's just simply the opposite. That's the way I kind of remembered stuff like that to make it simple. Position of the head. Now, it's like toward the chin being toward the chest is flexion. The chin being away or looking up is extension, of course. That's why a lot of times you look at this body and they got if the head's not padded, then they're going to probably be in have their head extended. If it is padded too much, they're going to be flexed. That's when we kind of get a neutral inline position, and that's pretty much. It'd be a judgment call on everybody else, but I was trying to make it line up to where the chin was lined up with the top of the chest, kind of even down through there. It's kind of a what they say ballpark, but as you know, not everybody's chest face is proportional. So I guess that's really not a good example. Hyper refers to the body that was flexed beyond normal. Like hyper means excess. Hypertension, hyperpnea, it's breathing fast. Hyper means in excess of what's normal. So if you look at flexion, if it related to movement, hyperflexion means that the body was flexed beyond its normal range of motion. Same way with hyperextension, that would work. It's extended further than what its normal range of motion is. Now, you think a supine is laying face down, prone is, supine is face up, prone is face down. So when you want to describe somebody, you're like, turning the palms down is supination, rotating the palms up is pronation. When could you use that if you're trying to describe an athletic injury or a sports injury where the patient is unable to supinate their hand? It's just fixed in a hyperflex position. They are unable to supinate or pronate their hand. So it kind of probably tells you, hey, you got a forearm fracture, probably both of them if that's going on. Internal and external rotation. Now you start and think about the leg or a hip fracture. Remember the midline. If the leg is rotating medially, then you've got medial rotation. If it's flexing, if it's turned out, then you got lateral rotation. We'll get in later to where if you got a medial rotation, you've probably got a posterior dislocation, because if you think of the hip bone the way it's constructed, if it comes out toward the back, that leg's going to want to turn in. If the leg comes out toward the front, that leg's going to want to turn out. So that's what a lot of times you can tell a posterior and anterior dislocation. A bilateral simply means both sides. It's both sides of the midline. Your eyes, ears, hands, lungs. That's why you can address both of those. Unilateral simply means on one side. What would that happen? Well, they got unilateral weakness, or hey, this guy's got a rash to his body, but it's unilateral, only one side. It stays one side of the midline, which would be a good indicator of like shingles. It stays on one side of the body. Ipsilateral refers to the same side of the body. Contralateral to the other side of the body. So we'll talk about that later. We talk about head injuries, like if before crossing out of the head, like if you got a bleed on the left side of your brain, you're going to have an ipsilateral pupillary response for it. Now, outside of the cranium, you're going to have a contralateral response. For example, well, I got a dilated pupil with a brain injury on the left side, but when it gets out of the skull, that's when it becomes contralateral. But yet I've got right-sided weakness. And when we get into head injuries and neurological stuff like that, then we'll talk about that more. That it'll start getting more interesting as that time goes on. Now, dividing up your quadrants and knowing what's in them, you should know what's in your right quadrant. You should know. You should be able to rattle off. Say, well, if I ask you what's in your right upper quadrant, you should be able to tell me. Well, the gallbladder, the liver, the hepatic flexure of the colon. You should be able to say that. Now, When you got abdominal pain and abdominal conditions, they can't always be, the abdomen is kind of hard to differentiate where things are. Now, they have a lot of referred pain. Like you can have an appendicitis, which is down in that right lower quadrant, and they'll say, man, I hurt so bad in the middle of my stomach. It's because it's referred pain. All those nerves are, you'll have a lot of time diffuse pain in that area. You can't really tell where it's at. But it's a good idea of knowing where they hurt. For example, I gave you an example earlier of periumbilical. Now you see where that's at. Now what's in the back of that back there? If you look up at the chest, you see that aorta back there, and esophagus back there. Well, periumbilical, what's right behind there? That's going to be your abdominal aorta. So that's how you say periumbilical pulsatile mass, or this patient is shot in the right upper quadrant. So what's going to be damaged up there? Shot in the left lower quadrant, or they shot in the retroperitoneal area. What's going on there? So that kind of gives you an idea of a generalized where that stuff is. Positions of the patient, how they were found. We need to document that. And when you find someone in your assessment part, patient was found supine in the floor. Patient was found prone. Patient was found. Now, there's a couple different names for, as far as some people say, hey, they're in a recovery position, but there's a couple of other names for that position, like down there at D. It can be called lateral recumbent. Is it left lateral or right lateral for this patient? You know, what's the patient's side they're laying on? That's left lateral recumbent. Some people will also use decubitus, and that doesn't always mean a sore. They'll say left. I don't ever use it because it's very easily confused with somebody saying a sore. So I don't use it, but it's a left lateral decubitus is another term for that. So the the sitting position, and that girl, look at that girl sitting there like that. You know, what could be going on with her? I mean, you see some things that's kind of abnormal. What's wrong with her? I don't know. What's not right? Well, she got kind of an upward gaze. Is that significant? I don't know yet. Could that be part of a seizure? She could be post-ictal, but there's a lot of stuff that just by looking at her, that assessment starts without any hands-on stethoscope or anything like that when you look at someone to get an appearance of. So note the position that they were found in. Big reason we do this stuff is you get some people that are knowledged and well versed on terminology and things like that. It kind of gives you like your own language. You actually know what to talk about. That's why medical people, they learn medical stuff and they're able to talk about it. Now, people that don't go to medical training, get medical education, that's the one just like, hey, can you put that layman term? Then you may need to change it. But when communicating with each other, you need to, I think, you be able to use correct terminology. Acronyms is when we put letters together to kind of abbreviate, like we got DCAT BTLS or EMT, something simple that stands for Emergency Medical Technician. The USAR is Urban Search and Rescue. So this is HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Those are all acronyms and abbreviations that are put together for that. There are accepted abbreviations, and there's some that people make up. Like if you there's a lot of bad abbreviations passed on to other people. For example, I had a report given to me one time I was trying to audit, and it had on her PE. Is that pulmonary edema? Is that pulmonary embolism? Is that physical exam? See where I'm going with that? There's some things like that that's not, look, it could mean all of that. Now, if you and I are talking and like, hey, this patient come in, they had a sudden acute chest pain, shortness of breath, they had left calf pain for several days, it was hot, and I said, I think they had a PE. I mean, we're talking in a reference between us two that yeah, that's probably where that would be appropriate at. But otherwise, abbreviations that have the same letter like that, PE should not be used to describe. You shouldn't just have that in a written report. You should spell that out because that could mean a whole lot of other things. using, for example, we'll talk about the accepted ones, but also zeros after decimal point. Avoid using zeros after decimal, but you want to include it before. Like you don't need them after a point. Like don't use 5.0 or 0.5 because you want to differentiate. You want to do like a positive. It's not really positive, negative, but I'm going to use 5 because it's understood that 5 it doesn't really need a zero behind it. If you put a zero, somebody's going to be looking for something else. Or use 0.5. That means that you've made sure that you hadn't left anything off. No, 0.5 is what I need to is what I'm trying to make you understand. So I put a zero in front of it to differentiate that I'm not doing that. The Joint Commission on accreditation and things like that. Some areas can have an accepted abbreviation list, but it needs to be standard. Like if your company has one, I know the one I work for does, that needs to be issued. And these are you only use these abbreviations if you're going to use them. I personally rarely use abbreviation unless I'll put something like COPD. I'll write that out. But otherwise, I don't use a lot of abbreviations when it comes to describing something like that because it doesn't want to. It just clarifies things. So use those that are understood. Be careful about the one that can be interpreted, like a 7 and an L could be messed up. So here's some commonly used symbols that you see, like degrees. Now, you don't on this keyboard, but I remember you could make a degree sign in some programs by hitting Alt 248. It would give the little zero sign, but it's not doing it in this program. But I've seen it do it in Excel and some things like that. So when you're typing in these things, you may not have the option to do degree signs. So that's when it would need to be spelled out. But if these are on your list and has a mean to do it, if they're an accepted list, then yeah, there's no problem with that. Now I do use greater than, less than, plus or minus, but those are pretty well standard abbreviations. So medical terminology, be familiar with the prefixes, metric conversions, and medical abbreviations. No, the metric system, you're going to see a lot of that in medicine. Weight usually is not. I mean, medicines usually aren't given so many per pound. It's going to be per kilogram, per gram. It's usually divided up into that because that's a much more accurate measurement when it comes to things that has to be so precise. Common medical abbreviations. Remember, there's some that's accepted and some standard. If you've never heard of it before and you see it, there's probably a big chance that nobody else has heard of it either. Medicines. Now, you're going to start, you're in this class, you're going to be given some medications, and you're going to be given IV therapy. So you need to know, like, you're going to have to understand like what volume is, milliliter compared to kiloliter, and you got gram, milligram. So start refreshing and you'll learn the metric system and how to break it down into this. So the kilograms to give your fluid boluses, like for kids, the standard dose for that is if it's a kid that's probably 8 years old, it's 20 milliliters per kilogram is what they have. So you're going to have to be able to figure out their weight and how much that gives. Now, a neonate less than 1 month, it's 10 milliliters per kilogram. So that's how you would figure up a bolus on that. Now, kids can't, and we'll learn this later, but kids can't take an overload of fluid. So if you got a neonate, you know, that bolus, they may only can take 40 milliliters. So that's when you have to really measure that coming out of the bag and mark where it's at. You know, even if it takes marking on a magic marker, I carry a magic marker close to me so I can mark stuff like that and be able to accurately measure it. Well, that's it for tonight. I know not a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, it's very important, but it's a lot of stuff that seems redundant. However, like I said, it is very important. I find it very important. And as time goes on, we're going to start getting into more of the stuff that you signed up for. Have any comments, questions, or concerns tonight? I'm going to give you a PIN number for tonight now for like the registration, and that's going to be 114. It's a 6-digit number. I think I can give 6. 824 114 824. That's simply the date and the time that we finished. Okay, well, if anybody don't have anything else, I'm going to close down for tonight. We'll be back here Saturday. Y'all write down questions, concerns you run across, and maybe have a little bit more active discussion. Anything else by anyone before I sign off?
Hey,
Yes.
this is Amy. So I came into the class a little bit late. This is the first one I've been live for. Like I missed the last 2 lectures.
Huh?
I'd have missed a little bit of information, but do we have any coursework that we have to do, any tests or anything in between classes?
There's usually I don't know if he emailed. I think Rob emailed had a schedule about that the other day. Let me see. And it's got like the coursework and the assignments and stuff that's on there. I think you do that through your I'm trying to think. I'm drawing a blank right now as far as the program that's on. Hold on a second.
Canvas.
Canvas. I'm sorry, I got a couple other classes that I do too, and it got a different format. That's why I was asking for it. But through your Canvas profile, have you got yours set up in Canvas and things like that as far as your assignments, as far as your quizzes?
No, sir, I haven't done that yet. I can do that tonight though, and try and get it up through Canvas and all. That would make sense. The coursework would be too. I hadn't looked yet.
And you'll also be able to find the through the ARES website thing is you'll be able to find these lectures because I record all of the lectures, and you'll be able to go back and watch all of them. And there are quizzes and stuff like that that go along with it. So you have Robert Roy's phone number and communication stuff to where he can help you with getting that set up.
Yeah, I have his contact information.
Okay, that way he can set up through the
But he did from the first video. Now you're not Mr. Robert.
No.
Oops.
Yeah.
Okay.
It probably says Bobby on paper. I go by Lynn, and like I said, I do a lot of teaching as well. Kind of act as a consultant and things like that for him as well, you know. So, but I think he's got a good virtual system set up, but a lot of people don't have it in this area. So, but get with him to make sure you get all that stuff set up. And I do see where you got like the quizzes and everything on there, and he'll email you the copy of the course schedule.
Okay.
Where are you?
That
located?
sounds good.
Where do you work?
I work for AMED in New Orleans. I live in Lacombe, Louisiana.
I'm real familiar with that. I used to work there. I worked in St. Tammany Parish for years. So.
Yep, I did. I worked for Acadian for a year. Just left there in November and came to AMED in New Orleans. And they just have a big need for advanced EMTs here, so jumped into class.
Okay.
So.
Well, get with him so he can get you on there. You should see all the assignments on there. And like I said, I do record the all the sessions as well. And I gave out that PIN number. That's the one that you'll have to register and sign in with to show that it's kind of like the signature of the PIN that you were, in the class for that time where you reviewed the material.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. That sounds good.
All right. Anybody else?
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Well, look, y'all have a good couple of days, and we'll be back here Saturday. And if y'all got any questions or anything, please bring back. So, I get tired of just hearing myself talk. All right. I'll let y'all go. Y'all have a good night.
Saturday at 6, right?
Yes, ma'am. Saturday at 6.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. You have a good night.
All right. You too. Bye.